Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight we share the story of Audrona Barnes, a young woman whose life was filled with promise and ambition. This is a story about hope, betrayal, and a family's relentless search for answers. As we settle in, we'll explore what happened during the summer of 2021 in Cleveland, Ohio. On July 30th, 2021, the summer air hung heavy over the suburbs of Warrensville Heights, Ohio. It was an ordinary Friday afternoon, the kind where families made plans for the weekend and young people dreamed about their futures. 19-year-old Audrona Barnes was one of those dreamers. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she knew exactly what she wanted to do with it. Audrona had set her sights on joining the United States Army. It was a path that would give her purpose, structure, and the chance to serve something greater than herself. That Friday afternoon, Audrona had an important appointment. Army recruiters arrived to pick her up, ready to discuss her future in the military. The meeting took place away from her boyfriend's apartment on Warner Road in Cleveland's Broadway Slavic Village neighborhood, where she had been staying. The recruiters picked her up from that address, spent time with her discussing opportunities and requirements, and then brought her back to the same location later that day. It seemed like a routine visit, the kind of day that would be just another step toward building the future she imagined. After the recruiters dropped her off, they couldn't say for certain whether Audrona went back inside the apartment or simply walked away from the building. It was a detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but it would become one of the last confirmed sightings of Audrona Barnes alive. Earlier that day, Audrona had spoken with her mother, Aqua Avagnon. Their last conversation happened at 2:30 in the afternoon. It was a normal exchange between mother and daughter. They had made plans together, family plans that everyone was looking forward to. But as the day wore on, something shifted. Later that evening, a text message appeared on the phone of Akio's boyfriend. The message came from Audriona's phone number. It was a simple request, asking for a ride from a gas station. But something about the message felt wrong. The words didn't sound like Audrona. The phrasing was off. Akio would later describe it as a message that didn't seem like it came from her. That text message would be the last communication anyone would receive from Audriona's phone. As Friday evening turned into Saturday morning, Audrona's family began to worry. Her social media accounts, which she normally checked regularly, went completely silent. No posts, no likes, no messages. It was as if she had simply vanished from the digital world. Then her phone was turned off entirely. For a young woman who stayed in regular contact with her family, this silence was deafening. Aqua knew her daughter. She knew their routines and patterns. As she would later explain, Audrona was an adult who came and went as she pleased, but she always stayed in touch. She would let her mother know where she was going, that communication was part of their relationship, part of the trust between them. But now there was nothing but silence. The family reported Audrona missing to the Warrensville Heights Police Department. They provided all the information they had about her last known whereabouts, about the Army recruiter visit, about the strange text message that didn't sound like her. Detective Gregory Curry took on the case. As he began investigating, he retraced Audrona's last known movements. He spoke with the Army recruiters who confirmed they had picked her up from her boyfriend's apartment and returned her to the same location, but they couldn't say what happened after they drove away. Detective Curry noted something peculiar about the text message requesting a ride from a gas station. When he checked the area around Warner Road where Audrona had been staying, he found that there was no gas station on that street. The detail didn't add up. If someone was going to pretend to be Audrona, they hadn't done their homework about the neighborhood. The detective wanted to speak with Audrona's boyfriend, a 39-year-old man named Benny Washington. But when Curry and his partner approached Washington to ask questions, the encounter didn't go as investigators had hoped. Washington became immediately hostile. According to Detective Curry, he blew up on the officers. Washington told them he hated the police and called them names. He refused to answer questions and demanded an attorney. The confrontation happened outside Washington's apartment, and police were never allowed inside. For investigators, this was troubling, but not necessarily unusual. Some people simply don't trust law enforcement. Some people know their rights and exercise them. Without evidence of a crime, there was little more Detective Curry could do in that moment. As the summer weeks passed, the case grew colder. In October of 2021, Detective Curry stated publicly that he had not ruled out foul play in Audrona's disappearance. But without concrete evidence, without witnesses, without a body, the investigation stalled. Audrona's family refused to accept the silence. In November of 2021, they organized a search party. Family members, friends, and volunteers gathered in the Broadway Slavic Village neighborhood, walking the same streets where Audrona was last seen. They knocked on doors, distributed flyers, and asked anyone who might have seen or heard something to come forward. But the neighborhood kept its secrets. Winter came to Cleveland. The case remained unsolved. For Audrona's mother, each day brought the same agonizing questions. Where was her daughter? Was she alive? Was she being held somewhere against her will? Or had something terrible happened? The uncertainty was perhaps the worst part. Aqua would later express frustration that police hadn't done more to find her daughter. She felt that because Audrona was an adult, authorities had treated the case as a possible runaway situation, rather than the potential crime it may have been. The seasons changed. Summer became fall became winter, and winter slowly gave way to spring. By March of 2022, 8 months had passed since Audrona Barnes disappeared. Life continued at the apartment building on Warner Road. Tenants came and went. Rent came due. Some tenants, like Benny Washington, fell behind on their payments. On March 11, 2022, Washington was formally evicted from his second-floor apartment. The eviction process had been ongoing, and the day finally came when he had to leave the premises. He gathered his belongings and departed from the apartment where he had lived, leaving behind only the remnants of his time there. 6 days later, on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, a cleaning worker arrived at the apartment. The building management had hired staff to clean the unit and prepared for the next tenant. It was routine work, the kind of task performed thousands of times across the country every day. The worker entered the apartment and began assessing what needed to be done. They moved through the rooms, taking stock of the work ahead. Then they stepped onto the balcony. On the balcony, they found a pile. Garbage bags, blankets, and clothes had been stacked together. At first, it might have seemed like typical debris left behind by an evicted tenant. But something about the pile felt wrong. As the worker moved closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Beneath the pile of blankets and clothes was a body, severely decomposed, wrapped in fabric and hidden in plain sight. The worker immediately called the police. Cleveland police officers responded to the scene, along with homicide detectives. The Cuyahoga County medical examiner was summoned. As investigators carefully removed the layers of fabric and examined the remains, they began the process of identification. The body was that of a young woman, and through dental records and other identifying features, the medical examiner confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. The remains were those of Audrona Barnes, the young woman who had disappeared the previous July, the woman whose family had searched desperately for answers, had been there all along, just feet away from the apartment where she had last been seen alive. The medical examination revealed the cause of death. Audrona had been shot in the head. Investigators found bullet casings on the balcony near where her body had been hidden. Inside the apartment, they discovered a bullet hole in one of the walls, silent evidence of violence that had occurred within those rooms. The evidence suggested a terrible timeline. Audrona had likely been killed inside the apartment shortly after the Army recruiters dropped her off, on July 30th. Then her body had been moved to the balcony and concealed beneath layers of fabric and household items. For 8 months, through the heat of summer, the chill of autumn, the bitter cold of a Cleveland winter, and into the early days of spring, Audrona's body had remained on that balcony, decomposing, forgotten by the man who lived just inside. Investigators believed that Washington had deliberately placed the body outside to accelerate decomposition. The elements in time would make identification more difficult, destroy evidence, and create distance from the crime itself. On March 19, 2022, 2 days after the discovery of Audrona's remains, Cleveland police attempted to locate and arrest Benny Washington. They found him, but what happened next added another layer to an already disturbing case. When officers approached, Washington fled. He ran from the police and entered another person's home. Then, in a desperate attempt to escape, he jumped out of a window, but there was nowhere left to run. Police apprehended Washington and placed him under arrest. He was charged with aggravated murder and gross abuse of a corpse. As investigators dug deeper into Washington's background, a troubling pattern emerged. This was not a man without a violent past. His criminal record stretched back years and contained multiple felony convictions. In 2010, Washington had shot a woman in the back over a $40 cocaine debt. The woman survived, but Washington was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison. It was a crime that demonstrated his capacity for violence over trivial disputes. There were other convictions as well: felonious assault, gun possession as a convicted felon, drug possession, vandalism. In June of 2021, just 1 month before Audrona disappeared, Washington had been charged with arson, assault, and aggravated menacing in a separate case. The records painted a picture of a dangerous man, someone who had repeatedly demonstrated violent behavior and disregard for the law. In the weeks leading up to his arrest for Audrona's murder, people had called police about Washington's erratic behavior in public. Something had been unraveling, though whether it was related to the hidden body on his balcony or other pressures in his life remained unclear. Washington was taken to the Cuyahoga County Jail. A judge set his bond at $2 million. He would remain behind bars awaiting trial. On March 22, 2022, family members, friends, and community activists gathered outside the Warrensville Heights Police Department. They came to bring attention to Audrona's case, but they also came with anger and frustration. Akua Abadan, Audrona's mother, stood before the crowd and the cameras. Her grief was raw, and her words cut through the cold spring air. "Where was y'all at when I asked for help?" she cried. It was a question born from months of anguish. From the moment Audrona disappeared, Akua had been pushing for answers. She had reported her daughter missing. She had organized searches. She had pleaded for police to take the case seriously. But she felt that because Audrona was 19 years old, an adult by legal standards, the authorities had treated her disappearance as less urgent. Perhaps she had simply run away. Perhaps she didn't want to be found. These were assumptions that Akua believed had cost precious time. If police had investigated more thoroughly in those early days, if they had been allowed inside Washington's apartment when they first tried to question him, might Audrona have been found sooner? Might there have been a chance to save her? These were questions that would haunt the family. The rally was not just about Audrona. It was about how missing persons cases are handled, particularly when the missing person is a young adult. It was about which cases receive resources and attention and which ones slip through the cracks. For Akua, there was also a more personal betrayal to process. During the 8 months that Audrona was missing, Benny Washington had not remained silent. He had called Akua regularly to check in. He had expressed concern about Audrona's whereabouts. He had joined in the family's worry. "Just checking on you," he would say. "Making sure you're okay. We're going to find her." He had even participated in the search efforts, helping to look for the young woman whose body lay hidden on his own balcony. It was a level of deception that went beyond the murder itself. It was a cruelty that compounded the tragedy. Washington had looked Audrona's mother in the eye. It offered comfort and false hope, all while knowing exactly what had happened to her daughter. More than a year after his arrest, Benny Washington's trial began on May 15, 2023. The case was heard before Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas Judge William McGinty. The prosecution presented its evidence methodically. There was the forensic evidence from the apartment and balcony, the bullet casings found near Audrona's body, the bullet hole in the apartment wall, the medical examiner's determination that she died from a gunshot wound to the head. There was the timeline. Audrona had last been seen alive when recruiters dropped her off at Washington's apartment. Within hours, her phone was used to send a message that didn't sound like her, then went silent forever. Her social media ceased all activity. She simply vanished. And the last place she was known to be was Washington's home. There was Washington's behavior when police first tried to question him. His hostility, his refusal to cooperate, his demand for an attorney before any accusations had even been made. There was his criminal history, showing a pattern of violence and disregard for human life. And there was the simple, devastating fact that Audriona's body had been found on his balcony, in his apartments, concealed in a manner that suggested deliberate effort to hide evidence of a crime. The defense had few cards to play. Washington did not testify in his own defense. There was no alternative explanation offered for how Audriona's body ended up where it did. No suggestion of another suspect or another scenario. On May 24th, 2023, after hearing all the evidence, the jury reached their verdict. They found Benny Washington guilty on multiple counts. 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, gross abuse of a corpse, and having weapons while under disability as a convicted felon. The verdict brought a measure of justice, but it could not bring back Audriana Barnes. It could not restore the future she had planned or ease the grief of those who loved her. On June 12, 2023, Benny Washington returned to court for his sentencing hearing. This was the moment when Audriona's family members would have the opportunity to speak directly to the man who had taken her from them. Ekua Avegnon stood before the court. She had spent nearly 2 years living with the knowledge of what Washington had done. She had endured the 8 months of not knowing where her daughter was, followed by the horror of learning the truth. Now she spoke directly to Washington. "You're disgusting," she said. Her voice carried the weight of a mother's grief and rage. She spoke about the phone calls, about how Washington had pretended to care, had pretended to help search for Audriana while knowing she was dead just feet from where he slept. "You helped me look for her," Akua said. "You called every day, just checking on you, making sure you're okay. We're going to find her. When all the while you knew what you did to her. You knew, but you just kept calling me. You kept saying, 'Oh, she's coming home,' and you knew she wasn't." She looked at Washington, at this man who had destroyed her family. "I hope every time you close your eyes you see her," she said. "Every time it's quiet you hear crying. You deserve everything that you're going to get." Audriona's aunt, Latoya Clark, also delivered an impact statement. She expressed the family's inability to comprehend why Washington had killed the young woman. What could possibly have motivated such violence against someone who had her whole life ahead of her? The statements were heartbreaking, that they gave voice to a grief that would never fully heal, to questions that would never be adequately answered. Judge McGinty then delivered Washington's sentence. For the murder of Audriana Barnes, for the abuse of her body, for the deception that followed, Benny Washington was sentenced to 38 years to life in prison. It was a sentence that ensured Washington would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He would grow old in a cell, his freedom taken from him just as he had taken Audriana's life. Audriana Barnes was 19 years old when she died. She was at the beginning of her adult life, making plans, dreaming dreams, working toward goals that would never be realized. She wanted to serve in the army. She wanted to do something meaningful with her life. She had a family who loved her, a mother who would have done anything to protect her. Her story is a reminder of how quickly life can be stolen, how trust can be betrayed, and how evil can hide behind a familiar face. It's also a story about a mother's love and determination. Akua Avegnon never stopped searching for her daughter, even when authorities seemed to lose interest. Even when the case grew cold, she kept pushing for answers. And it's a story about the importance of taking missing persons cases seriously, regardless of the age of the missing person, adult or child. Everyone who disappears leaves behind people who love them, people who deserve to know the truth. Today, Audriana's name is not forgotten. Her case has raised awareness about domestic violence, about the warning signs of dangerous relationships, and about the need for better resources for families of the missing. Her story continues to be told, not just as a true crime case, but as a memorial to a young woman whose potential was cut tragically short. Rest in peace, Audriana Barnes. Your dreams may have been stolen from you, but your memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved you and in the lessons your story teaches us all. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, Welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. In the cold winter months of January 2021, Buffalo, New York was blanketed in snow, the city's east side neighborhoods, with their tightly knit communities and century-old houses, carried on with the rhythms of daily life. Among the residents was a young woman named Tiara Lott, 22 years old, standing at the threshold of what should have been an exciting new chapter in her life. Those who knew Tiara described her as radiant. She had a warmth about her that drew people in, the kind of person who could light up a room simply by entering it. Her cousin Shonderie McCullers would later say that Tiara was ambitious, always working towards something better. Friends remembered her as the life of the party, someone who loved to work and earn her own way, who took pride in her independence. Tiara had recently accomplished something she was particularly proud of. After years of determination, she had earned her GED. It was more than just a certificate to her. It represented perseverance, a stepping stone toward the future she envisioned for herself. And that future was beginning to take shape. In January 2021, Tiara had just secured a new position in the field of information technology. For a young woman looking to build a career, this was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd been working toward. Those close to her could see the excitement in her eyes when she talked about it. Pastor Tim Newkirk of GYC Ministries, who would later become deeply involved in seeking justice for Tiara, said she had the whole world at her disposal. She had dreams, aspirations, places she wanted to see and things she wanted to accomplish. But Tiara would never start that IT job. She would never get to see where that path might lead her. Because on the evening of January 29th, 2021, something happened that would cut her story tragically short. To understand what happened to Tiara Lott, we need to understand the relationship that would ultimately end her life. Tiara had been spending considerable time with a 27-year-old man named Andre Wickham, known to some by the nickname Dro. Andre had become Tiara's boyfriend. On the surface, perhaps the relationship seemed normal to casual observers. But those closest to Tiara, her family and friends who loved her, had begun to notice warning signs that filled them with growing unease. It's a familiar pattern, one that plays out too often. The people who love someone begin to see changes. Small things at first that gradually accumulate into a larger picture of concern. Tiara's loved ones were worried. They could sense that something wasn't right in this relationship, that there was something troubling beneath the surface. Their concerns weren't baseless. They were rooted in observations, in the things they could see happening to Tiara, in changes in her demeanor and appearance that troubled them deeply. The relationship was centered around a house on Gold Street in Buffalo's Lovejoy neighborhood. The Lovejoy area, historically a working-class section of the city, was where many of the events of late January 2021 would unfold. It was to this address on Gold Street that Tiara would go to spend time with Andre. It was at this address that her belongings would later be found. And it was at this address in an upstairs apartment where the worst would ultimately occur. January 29th, 2021 began like many other winter days in Buffalo. The city was in the grip of the season's cold, and people moved about their lives, bundled against the chill. For sports fans, there was anticipation in the air. The Buffalo Bills were scheduled to play Kansas City at home, and football was on everyone's mind. But while many in Buffalo were focused on the game, a young woman was in trouble. That evening, Tiara Lott video chatted with one of her friends. It was the kind of casual connection many of us make without thinking. Checking in with someone we care about, seeing their face on a screen. But what this friend saw during that video call alarmed her immediately. Tiara's face was bruised. The injuries were visible through the camera, unmistakable signs that something violent had occurred. The friend could see that Tiara was hurt. According to her mother, Patricia Davis, Tiara was sore during this call. She was clearly in distress. though she may have been trying to hide the full extent of what was happening. The friend, recognizing the danger, asked Tiara for her location. She wanted to send an Uber to pick Tiara up, to get her away from wherever she was, from whatever situation she was in. It was the kind of quick thinking that might have saved a life. The instinct of a friend who recognized that something was desperately wrong and wanted to help. But before Tiara could provide the address, the video call disconnected. What happened in those moments after the call ended? Did the connection simply fail, as technology sometimes does? Or was there a more sinister reason the conversation was cut short? We may never know the exact sequence of events. But what followed would haunt Tiara's family forever. Approximately 10 minutes after that video call ended, Tiara sent out a text message to several of her loved ones. The message was brief, but its meaning was unmistakable. It was the kind of message no one ever wants to receive. "God forbid, if anything happens to me, that I love y'all, and tell everybody," read those words again. Consider their weight. This was a young woman who knew she was in danger. A woman who, in what may have been her final moments of freedom to communicate, chose to send a message of love to her family. It's the kind of message that speaks to both love and terror, to the horrible awareness that something terrible might be about to happen. Her mother, Patricia Davis, would later recount these details to local news reporters. Imagine receiving that text message. Imagine being Tiara's friend, knowing you'd just seen her bruised face on that video call, knowing you'd asked for her location to help her, and then receiving or hearing about this message. For Tiara's family, this text message was the beginning of a nightmare. When Tiara didn't come home that night, her family knew immediately that something was wrong. This wasn't a young woman who simply disappeared without explanation. The text message she'd sent, combined with the bruises her friend had seen on the video call, painted a picture that filled them with dread. Her family reported her missing. January 29th was the last time Tiara Lott was seen alive. She had been at the house on Gold Street, the same address associated with Andre Wiggum. Her family knew this was the last place she'd been. Desperate for answers and clinging to hope, Tiara's family began their own search. They went to the Gold Street house, the place they believed she'd last been seen. What they found there only deepened their anguish and confirmed their worst fears. Inside the house, they discovered some of Tiara's belongings. They found her clothes, items she would never have left behind willingly. They found her boots, the kind of practical footwear anyone in Buffalo needs during winter. These weren't things someone would abandon if they were leaving of their own accord. 4 days after Tiara disappeared, her family returned to the Gold Street house. On the second visit, they made another discovery that struck them like a physical blow. They found Tiara's coat. Inside the coat were her identification cards. Think about that for a moment. In the middle of a Buffalo winter, what does it mean when someone's coat is left behind? When their ID cards, the documents that prove who you are in this world, are abandoned in a house, it means that person didn't leave by choice. It means something prevented them from taking these essential items with them. Patricia Davis, Tiara's mother, would later describe these moments to the media. You can only imagine the desperation, the hope battling against fear, the need to find her daughter, warring with the growing certainty that something terrible had happened. The Buffalo Police Department was investigating. They had the report of a missing young woman. They had a concerned family providing them with information. And they had a location where the missing woman had last been seen. They had the name of the person she'd been with, Andre Wiggum. But as the investigation began, there was a significant problem. Andre Wiggum was nowhere to be found. The last person believed to have seen Tiara Lott alive had vanished. He had left Buffalo. For investigators, this pattern, this flight, was significant. When someone connected to a missing person suddenly disappears themselves, when they leave town as questions begin to be asked, it raises immediate red flags. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. Tiara's family continued to search, continued to hope, continued to plead with anyone who might have information. They distributed flyers. They talked to media. They refused to let Tiara's disappearance fade into the background noise of daily life. Pastor Tim Newkirk and various community organizations rallied around the family. In Buffalo's tight-knit communities, particularly among black residents who understood too well how easily cases like this could be forgotten, there was a determination to keep Tiara's name in the public consciousness. On social media, people shared her photo and information. Friends and family held vigils. Community activists spoke out. There was a collective recognition that Tiara represented something larger than just one missing woman. As community activist Dominique Calhoun would later say, Tiara represents every young black woman here in the city of Buffalo. Tiara was every last one of us. The search intensified. Family members, friends, and volunteers combed through neighborhoods. They knocked on doors. They asked questions. They followed every lead they could find, no matter how small. And then, on February 13th, 2021, 2 weeks after Tiara disappeared, someone found her. The location was near Wex Avenue in Buffalo's Schiller Park neighborhood, along the railroad tracks that cut through the city's east side. These tracks, like so many urban railways, run through neighborhoods where people live their lives in the shadow of the train's rumbling passage. Someone walking near the tracks that Saturday made a discovery that would confirm the family's worst fears. There, alongside the railroad tracks, was a body. The body of Tiara Lott. Buffalo police were called to the scene. Captain Jeff Rinaldo confirmed to the media that they had found a body. The family was notified by the homicide unit. Patricia Davis received the news that no mother ever wants to hear. Her daughter, her baby, had been found dead. The location itself is significant. Bodies found along railroad tracks suggest an attempt to dispose of evidence, to put distance between a crime scene and the victim. The railroad tracks near Wex Avenue were not where Tiara had disappeared. She had last been seen on Gold Street in the Lovejoy neighborhood. Someone had moved her body from one location to another. The medical examiner would need to conduct an autopsy to officially confirm identification and determine the cause of death. But for Tiara's family, there was no doubt. They knew it was their Tiara. They knew their search was over, but not in the way they had prayed for. For 2 weeks, they had held on to hope. For 2 weeks, they had imagined scenarios where Tiara might still be alive somewhere, might somehow come home. Now those hopes were extinguished. Their daughter, their cousin, their friend was gone. The Buffalo Police Department's homicide unit took over the investigation. This was now officially a murder case. The focus shifted from finding a missing person to finding her killer. And investigators already had a primary suspect in mind. Andre Wiggum, the man who had been Tiara's boyfriend, the last person believed to have seen her alive, the man who had fled Buffalo shortly after her disappearance. As Buffalo police homicide detectives worked the case, they began to piece together what they believed had happened during those late evening hours of January 29th and into the early morning of January 30th. Based on the evidence they gathered, investigators developed a theory about the crime. They believed that Tiara Lott had been strangled to death. The method was brutal and intimate. Strangulation is one of the most personal forms of violence, requiring sustained physical contact and force. It's often categorized as a crime of passion, something done in anger or during domestic violence. Prosecutors would later allege that Andre Wiggum had strangled Tiara with his hands inside the upstairs apartment on Gold Street. This was where Tiara had been during that final video call with her friend, where her face had appeared bruised. This was where she had sent that haunting text message to her family, and this, investigators believed, was where her life had ended. After killing Tiara, the theory went, Wiggum had then disposed of her body along the railroad tracks near Wex Avenue. Then he had fled the city entirely. But proving these allegations would require finding Andre Wiggum, and he had effectively vanished. The Buffalo Police Department initially led the investigation, but as it became clear that Wiggum had left the state, federal authorities became involved. The United States Marshals Service, the agency responsible for tracking fugitives across state lines, joined the hunt. In June 2021, several months after Tiara's body had been found, the U.S. Marshals Service made a public announcement. They were actively seeking Andre Wiggum for questioning in connection with Tiara Lott's death. They identified him as a person of interest, someone they urgently needed to locate. The Marshals Service released a description. Andre Wiggum, also known as Dro, was a black male with brown eyes, approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighing around 210 pounds. He had several tattoos, including one on his neck. Authorities believed he had connections to Ohio and North Carolina, states where he might have fled. There was another crucial detail. Authorities believe Wiggum was armed and dangerous. This wasn't just a person of interest they wanted to question. This was someone who posed a potential threat. Crime Stoppers Western New York got involved, offering a reward for information. Initially, the reward was $2,500. As the case remained unsolved and Wiggum remained at large, the reward increased to $7,500. It was a significant sum, an indication of how seriously law enforcement was taking this case. The community continued to press for justice. Pastor Tim Newkirk became a vocal advocate, organizing vigils and public awareness campaigns. The Community Action Coalition of Western New York formed in part as a response to cases like Tiara's. They distributed flyers in neighborhoods like Schaffer Village, where there were reports that Wiggum had been spotted. Throughout 2021 and into 2022, the search continued. Months turned into a year. On January 30th, 2022, almost exactly 1 year after Tiara's death, nearly 40 family members, neighbors, and friends gathered on Gold Street for a vigil. They released red heart-shaped balloons into the winter sky and chanted justice for Tiara Lott. Tiara's uncle, Bishara Lott, spoke about the family's frustration. They had received almost no news about the case in a year. It's just unbelievable that such an incident can take place and there are no repercussions as of yet, he said. The pain in the family was palpable. Patricia Davis, Tiara's mother, continued to speak to media, continued to plead for information. Tiara was loved by so many, and we miss her so much. She told reporters, "If you know anything, please call. I would appreciate it." To her, behind the scenes, law enforcement was working the case relentlessly. Buffalo police homicide detectives logged countless hours. The U.S. Marshals Service pursued leads across multiple states. Erie County District Attorney John Flynn's office was building a case, preparing for the day when they might finally bring charges. But they needed to find Andre Wiggum first. In late April 2022, more than a year after Tiara's body had been found, something changed. District Attorney John Flynn would later reveal that investigators had received information approximately 2 weeks earlier that Wiggum might have returned to the Buffalo area. After months of being on the run, after more than a year of evading law enforcement across state lines, the suspect had apparently come back. Why would someone wanted in connection with a murder investigation return to the very city where the crime occurred? We can only speculate. Perhaps he thought enough time had passed. Perhaps he missed his connections in Buffalo. Perhaps he believed he could blend back in without being noticed. Or perhaps after all those months of running and hiding, the weight of it all had become unbearable. On the morning of May 2nd, 2022, Andre Wiggum made a decision. He turned himself in to authorities. That afternoon, Wiggum was arraigned in Erie County Court before Judge Susan Egan. The charges were severe. 1 count of murder in the second degree, a Class AI felony that carried a maximum sentence of 25 years to life in prison. The courtroom that day represented a moment many had wondered if they would ever see. District Attorney John Flynn held a press conference alongside Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown and Buffalo police officials. Deputy Police Commissioner Barbara Lark spoke about the relief this brought to Tiara's family, while acknowledging the tragedy that nothing could bring Tiara back. From what we know, she was a phenomenal young lady who did not deserve this. Lark said, "But our detectives, who worked endless hours in this investigation to bring some relief to this family." Flynn detailed the investigation, explaining how the U.S. Marshals had been involved for over a year, how they had been trying to locate Wiggum across multiple states, and how the defendant's decision to turn himself in that morning had finally brought this chapter to a close. Pastor Newkirk was at the arraignment with members of Tiara's family. After so many months of vigils and balloon releases, of distributing flyers and making public pleas, there was finally some movement toward justice. "We never lost hope or faith," Newkirk said. "We were in touch with law enforcement, so it was just a matter of time." Wiggum was remanded without bail. He would remain in custody as the legal process moved forward. The case against Andre Wiggum proceeded through the court system. The prosecution had built their case, accumulating evidence over the year-plus investigation. They were prepared to prove that Wiggum had intentionally caused Tiara Lott's death by strangling her with his hands inside that upstairs apartment on Gold Street. But as is often the case in the criminal justice system, the matter would be resolved not through a trial, but through a plea agreement. In February 2023, nearly 2 years after Tiara's death, Andre Wiggum accepted a plea deal, instead of going to trial on the second-degree murder charge, which could have resulted in a sentence of 25 years to life. Wiggum pleaded guilty to 1 count of first-degree manslaughter. This is a common development in murder cases. Manslaughter carries a lesser sentence than murder, and pleading guilty eliminates the uncertainty of a trial. For prosecutors, it guarantees a conviction and punishment. For defendants, it often means a more lenient sentence, and avoiding the possibility of an even longer term if convicted at trial. The plea meant that Wiggum admitted his responsibility for Tiara's death, even if the specific legal charge was different than what he'd originally been indicted for. He acknowledged that he had caused her death, that his actions had ended her life. The sentencing was scheduled for several months later. During this period, Tiara's family had to wait once more, knowing that Wiggum had admitted guilt but not yet knowing what his punishment would be. Finally, on June 12, 2023, Andre C. Wiggum, now 29 years old, appeared before the court for sentencing. The Erie County District Attorney's Office announced the result. Wiggum would spend 25 years in prison. 25 years. It's a long time. Andre Wiggum, who was 27 when he killed Tiara, would be 54 when he completes his sentence. The better part of his adult life would be spent behind bars. But for Tiara's family, no sentence could truly balance the scales. Tiara was 22 years old when she died. She would never turn 23, never pursue that IT career, never fulfill those dreams Pastor Newkirk had spoken about. All the years Wiggum would serve in prison, Tiara would still be gone. The murder of Tiara Lott is, in many ways, a familiar tragedy. It follows a pattern we see too often in cases of domestic violence, an intimate partner homicide, a young woman in a relationship that concerned her family, visible injuries, a text message that essentially functioned as a goodbye, a body found weeks later, a boyfriend who fled. According to the CDC, homicide is a leading cause of death for women aged 18-44 in the United States, and a significant percentage of those homicides are committed by intimate partners. Strangulation, the method allegedly used to kill Tiara, is particularly associated with intimate partner violence. Studies have shown that when a perpetrator has previously strangled or choked their partner, it dramatically increases the risk of future lethal violence. Tiara's friend, seeing those bruises on the video call, asking for the address to send help, was responding to exactly the kind of warning sign that domestic violence experts tell us to watch for. Her instinct was correct. She recognized danger. She tried to help, but the call disconnected before she could get the location. That final text message, "God forbid, if anything happens to me, that I love y'all and tell everybody," haunts because it shows awareness. Tiara knew she was in danger. She knew something might happen to her. In what may have been her last moments of freedom, she tried to warn her family, to say goodbye, to express love one final time. The community response to Tiara's death reflects something important about how communities of color, particularly black women and girls, mobilize when one of their own goes missing or is killed. There's often a recognition that these cases might not receive the same attention or resources as other cases, and so the community steps up. Pastor Newkirk and the Community Action Coalition of Western New York, the family members who organized vigils and balloon releases, the community activists like Dominique Calhoun, who spoke about Tiara representing every young black woman in Buffalo. They all understood that keeping Tiara's name alive, keeping pressure on law enforcement, making noise, refusing to let the case fade away, all of this mattered. And perhaps it did matter. Perhaps those vigils and media appearances and public demands for justice played a role in keeping the case active, in ensuring resources were devoted to finding Wiggum and creating an environment where surrendering became his best option. It took more than a year, but ultimately Andre Wiggum was found, charged, convicted, and sentenced. By the standards of the criminal justice system, this case reached a resolution. Justice, in the legal sense, was served. But what is justice when measured against a life cut short? What is justice for a mother who will never again see her daughter smile, hear her voice, share her accomplishments? What is justice for dreams unfulfilled, for a future that will never be? Tiara Lott should be alive today. She should be working in IT, perhaps advanced in her career by now. She should be 26 years old, living her life, pursuing her ambitions. She should have had the chance to become whoever she was meant to be. Instead, her life ended on a winter night in Buffalo, in an upstairs apartment on Gold Street, at the hands of someone who was supposed to care for her. Her body was left along railroad tracks, like refuse to be discarded. But she was not refuse. She was not nothing. She was Tiara Lott, a young woman who earned her GED and was proud of it. A young woman who had just gotten a job in IT. A woman her pastor described as having the whole world at her disposal. A woman her friends called radiant and ambitious. A woman her cousin said represented every young black woman in Buffalo. Her mother, Patricia Davis, will carry this grief for the rest of her life. Her family will live with an absence that can never be filled. Her friends will remember her, will mark the anniversaries, will think of her when they achieve things she never got to experience. The community in Buffalo won't forget Tiara Lott. Her case became a rallying point, a reminder of the importance of speaking up, of not letting these cases disappear, of demanding justice and accountability. And perhaps somewhere, there's someone in a relationship that's starting to show warning signs. Someone whose partner is starting to become controlling or violent. Someone whose friends are starting to worry. Maybe they'll remember Tiara's story. Maybe they'll remember that friend who saw the bruises on the video call and tried to send help. Maybe they'll reach out before it's too late. That's ultimately what we can take from Tiara's tragedy. The warning signs are often there. The danger is often visible to those paying attention. And sometimes reaching out, speaking up, asking for help, these actions can save a life. Tiara tried to ask for help. That video call, that plea for an Uber ride away from danger, that final text message. These were all cries for help, but time ran out. The call disconnected. The message came too late. Andre Wickham is in prison now, serving his 25-year sentence. Each day he wakes up behind bars is a day Tiara doesn't wake up at all. Each meal he eats, each breath he takes, is one she doesn't have. In the end, we're left with a simple truth. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her is gone. A family is forever broken. A community mourned and demanded justice. And 25 years in prison can never, will never, balance what was taken. Tiara Lott deserved better. She deserved to live. She deserved to see her dreams come true. She deserved to become the person she was working so hard to be. She deserved to be more than a cautionary tale. More than a true crime story. More than a name on a memorial or a balloon released into the winter sky. But since we can't give her back her life, the least we can do is remember her. Remember Tiara Lott. Remember her ambition, her dreams, her radiance. Remember what was taken from her. Remember why it matters. Maybe by remembering, by learning, by speaking up when we see warning signs, we can help ensure that other young women don't meet the same fate. Rest in peace, Tiara Lott. You are not forgotten. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. Brandon, Mississippi is the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name. Tree-lined streets, well-kept homes, and a tight-knit community where Friday night football games bring everyone together. In March of 2024, this quiet suburb would become the center of a tragedy that no one saw coming. Ashley Nicole Smiley was 40 years old that spring. Born in Stuart, Florida on April 11, 1983. She carried her love of the ocean and sunshine with her when she moved to Mississippi. Those who knew her said she was a Floridian at heart, always planning the next beach trip or Disney World vacation with her family. For 9 years, Ashley dedicated herself to teaching mathematics. She spent her last 3 years at Northwest Rankin High School, where she was known for her warmth and dedication. Students described her as someone who truly cared, who would stay late to help anyone struggling with equations or life itself. She had that rare quality teachers hope for, the ability to make students feel seen. At home, Ashley loved the simple things. Long walks with her 2 golden retrievers, Wyatt and Finn, reading quietly in the evening, playing video games with her daughter. She had a gift for mathematics, technology, and the arts. But more than any of that, she loved being a mother. It was what she treasured most in this world. Ashley lived on Ashton Way with her husband Heath Smiley and her 14-year-old daughter Carly Madison Gregg. To anyone looking from the outside, they seemed like an ordinary family navigating the everyday challenges of raising a teenager. But beneath the surface, something was unraveling. Carly was a ninth grader at the same school where her mother taught. She was bright, academically gifted, but increasingly withdrawn. Friends noticed changes in her behavior during the months leading up to March. She seemed irritable, distracted, unable to focus in class the way she once had. What her parents didn't know was that Carly had begun living what prosecutors would later call a secret life. She had started smoking and vaping marijuana. She kept burner phones hidden in her room, using encrypted messaging apps to communicate away from parental oversight. There were other warning signs too. A history of self-harm, mood swings, and an incident where she'd brought a Swiss Army knife to school, which had resulted in her transfer. Her family had tried to help. Carly had been seeing a psychiatrist, Dr. Andrew Clark, who was treating her for depression and auditory hallucinations. She'd been prescribed medication, including a drug called escitalopram for anxiety and depression. The family had even tried equine-assisted therapy, hoping that time with horses might ease whatever was troubling their daughter. But the medication seemed to make things worse, contributing to symptoms of dissociation and worsening mood swings. Carly felt herself slipping further away, and the adults around her struggled to understand what was happening inside her mind. There was tension in the house, the kind that builds slowly over time. Ashley had previously confiscated Carly's phone as punishment, creating friction between mother and daughter. Heath would later mention that Carly's biological father, Kevin Gregg, had struggled with drug use himself. Perhaps he wondered that history had influenced their daughter in ways they couldn't fully grasp. By mid-March, one of Carly's friends had become so concerned about her drug use that he made a difficult decision. He contacted Ashley directly to tell her what was happening. That conversation took place on March 19th. That Tuesday began like any other school day. Ashley and Carly left for Northwest Rankin High School together. That morning, Heath headed to his own job. The house on Ashton Way stood quiet under the Mississippi sky. At school, Carly's teachers noticed she seemed off. She was grumpy and irritable, unable to concentrate on her work. She would later describe experiencing what she called a memory blank that day, though what that meant exactly would become a matter of dispute. The school day ended at its usual time. At 3:54 in the afternoon, Ashley and Carly returned home together. Security cameras mounted in the garage and dining areas captured their arrival. Ashley sent a text message to Heath, mentioning plans to go grocery shopping later. But first there was something she needed to address. Ashley had learned about the marijuana, the vapes, the hidden phones. When they arrived home that afternoon, she went straight to Carly's bedroom to search for evidence. There, concealed among her daughter's belongings, she found boxes of vape pens. The confrontation that followed is something we can only imagine. The disappointment, the worry, the anger, perhaps. At being deceived, Ashley was still in her daughter's room when Carly made a decision that would shatter everything. The kitchen security camera continued recording. At approximately 4 o'clock, the footage shows Carly walking from her parents' bedroom. Her right hand is behind her back, concealing something from the camera's view. What she was hiding was her mother's .357 Magnum handgun, which she had taken from beneath her parents' mattress. Carly walks toward her own bedroom, where her mother is still searching through her things. The camera can't see into that room, but the microphone picks up everything. A gunshot rings out, then a scream, then 2 more shots in rapid succession. The sounds echo through the empty house and fade into silence. Moments later, Carly walks back into view of the kitchen camera. Her hands are still behind her back. She moves calmly, methodically. She sits down on a bar stool at the kitchen counter. The 2 golden retrievers, Wyatt and Finn, hover near her feet, sensing something is wrong but unable to understand what. Carly picks up a phone and begins texting. She's using her mother's phone, sending a message to Heath asking when he'll be home. The message is casual, unremarkable, just a daughter checking in with her stepfather. But that wasn't the only person she contacted. Approximately 45 minutes passed. During that time, Carly sent another text, this one to a close friend. She told them it was an emergency and asked them to come over right away. When the friend arrived at the house on Ashton Way, Carly met them at the door. She asked a strange question. Have you ever seen a dead body before? The friend said no. Carly led them inside and showed them her mother's body, lying on the floor of the bedroom. Then she showed them the gun she had used. According to later testimony, Carly told this friend that there were 2 for the head, 1 for the chest waiting for her stepfather when he got home. The exact meaning of this statement would be debated, but the intent seemed clear enough. This wasn't over yet. The friend, understandably terrified, made an excuse and left as quickly as possible. They didn't call the police. They didn't know what to do. They were just a teenager, thrust into a nightmare they couldn't process. Keith Smiley arrived home just after 5 o'clock that evening, expecting an ordinary Tuesday night. He entered through the back door, the one that leads into the kitchen where the security camera was mounted. As he stepped inside, he saw Carly waiting for him, armed with the same gun she'd used to kill her mother. She fired at him. The bullet struck him in the shoulder. Despite the shock and pain, Heath fought back. He lunged toward his stepdaughter and physically wrestled the weapon away from her. Years later, testifying in court, he would describe the look on her face during that struggle. Her eyes were really big, he said, like she had seen a demon or something to that effect. With the gun now in Heath's possession, Carly ran. She bolted out the back door, hopped the fence, and disappeared into the neighborhood. Heath, bleeding from his shoulder wound, began searching the house. He called out for Ashley. When she didn't answer, he made his way toward the back bedrooms. That's where he found his wife's body lying on the floor of their daughter's room. He called 911 immediately. The dispatch recording would later be played in court, capturing those first terrible moments of realization, his voice shaking, struggling to explain the incomprehensible. His wife was dead. His stepdaughter had shot them both, and she was now running loose somewhere in the neighborhood. Rankin County Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes, along with a helicopter from the Mississippi Highway Patrol. They began a coordinated search for a 14-year-old girl who had just committed murder. They found Carly at 5:35 p.m., roughly half an hour after Heath's 911 call. She was located approximately half a mile from her home, hiding in a drainage pipe on her hands and knees. Officers took her into custody without incident. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence. That last charge related to something investigators discovered during their examination of the crime scene. The family had multiple security cameras throughout the house, but one was missing. Officers eventually found it hidden inside the refrigerator. Whether the cold temperature had damaged the stored footage became a question for forensic analysis. But the act itself suggested a consciousness of guilt, an awareness that what had happened needed to be concealed. As news of the tragedy spread through Brandon and the surrounding communities, shock rippled outward. How could this have happened? How could a 14-year-old girl murder her own mother? The Rankin County School District released a statement acknowledging the loss. Mrs. Smiley dedicated 9 years to education, with her last 3 being at NWRHS. They wrote, "Her presence was deeply valued by both our staff and students." Flowers appeared outside Ashley's classroom door. Colleagues and students left tributes online, remembering her smile, her compassion, the way she made mathematics less intimidating. One teacher wrote about Ashley's dedication to challenging students, how she loved them even more when they struggled. Another described her as someone who radiated the positivity that everyone needed. Meanwhile, the legal system began its work. Carly appeared in juvenile court the day after the shooting, where a judge certified her to be tried as an adult. She was transferred to the Rankin County Adult Detention Center and given a bond of $1 million. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. In May, a grand jury formally indicted her on charges of murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence. The trial of Carly Madison Gregg began on September 16, 2024, in Rankin County. By then, Carly was 15 years old. The courtroom was crowded, filled with media, curious onlookers, and family members trying to make sense of what had happened. Carly's defense team had filed a motion to exclude the public and press, arguing that she couldn't receive a fair trial under such scrutiny. Judge Dewey Arthur denied that motion, citing Mississippi precedent supporting media access to trials. The proceedings would be open and public. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They argued that Carly knew exactly what she was doing on March 19th. She was angry about being discovered, angry about the confrontation with her mother, and she made a calculated decision to kill. Prosecutor Catherine White Newman described Carly's secret life to the jury. The marijuana, the burner phones, the behavior that had alarmed her friends. She emphasized the timeline of events, the way Carly calmly retrieved the gun, concealed it from the cameras, and then texted her stepfather to lure him home. The prosecution played the security camera footage for the jury, letting them hear the gunshots, the screams, and the eerie silence that followed. The defense, led by attorney Bridget Todd, took a different approach. "This is not a whodunit case," she told the courtroom. "We know who took action on March 19. This is a why case." The defense built their argument around Carly's mental health. They called Dr. Andrew Clark, her psychiatrist, who testified about her depression and auditory hallucinations. Dr. Clark explained that Carly had been in crisis, that the medication she was taking may have worsened her symptoms, contributing to dissociation and impaired judgment. The defense's strategy was to prove insanity under Mississippi law, which requires showing that a defendant didn't understand the nature of their actions and couldn't distinguish right from wrong at the time of the crime. Dr. Clark stated that Carly had no memory of shooting her mother and stepfather, suggesting a complete break from reality during those critical moments. But the prosecution brought in their own experts to rebut this testimony. Dr. Jason Pickett, a forensic psychiatrist, examined Carly and reviewed all the evidence. He concluded that she did not meet Mississippi's legal definition of insanity on March 19th. In his assessment, Carly knew the nature and wrongfulness of her actions. Other state experts testified as well. Psychiatric nurse practitioner Olivia Leber, counselor Rebecca Kirk, and forensic psychiatric specialist Dr. Amanda Giuliano. Together, they painted a picture of a teenager who, despite her mental health struggles, understood what she was doing. The prosecution pressed Dr. Clark on cross-examination. Assistant District Attorney Michael Smith asked directly, "You agree that Carly tried to cover up the crime, right?" Dr. Clark had to concede, "Yes." "If you try to cover up a crime," Smith continued, "doesn't that show awareness that what you did was wrong?" This became the central question for the jury to answer. The defense wasn't denying that Carly pulled the trigger. They were arguing that her mind was so fractured, so detached from reality, that she couldn't be held fully responsible. But the evidence of concealment told a different story. The hidden security camera, the text from her mother's phone, the way she calmly sat at the kitchen counter after the shooting, planning her next move, the 45 minutes she spent waiting for Heath, during which she invited a friend over to see what she'd done. These actions suggested a consciousness of guilt, an awareness of wrongdoing. Heath Smiley took the stand on the second day of trial. The courtroom was packed. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The stepfather who'd survived, who'd fought off his stepdaughter and wrestled the gun away, who discovered his wife's body and made that desperate 911 call. Heath described arriving home that Tuesday evening, entering through the back door, seeing Carly with the gun. He described the struggle, the look in her eyes that haunted him still. The 911 call was played for the jury, Heath's voice shaking with shock and grief, trying to communicate the impossible to the dispatcher. Carly sat at the defense table, and according to reports, she began sobbing uncontrollably as her stepfather's recorded voice filled the courtroom. Two juvenile witnesses also testified, though media coverage of their testimony was limited because they were minors. They provided additional context about Carly's behavior after the shooting, filling in details about her state of mind. Throughout the trial, body cam footage from responding officers was shown. The jury saw the house on Ashton Way, the scene where Ashley died, the places where Carly had walked carrying her mother's gun. Before the trial began, the prosecution had offered Carly a plea deal, 40 years in prison for the murder charge. With the attempted murder and evidence tampering charges dropped, Judge Arthur made sure Carly understood what she was giving up by rejecting this offer. But Carly and her attorneys decided to roll the dice, to pursue the insanity defense and hope for a more lenient outcome. On September 20th, 2024, after a 5-day trial, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned after 2 hours. Carly Madison Gregg was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder of Ashley Smiley, attempted murder of Heath Smiley, and tampering with evidence. The judge then sent the jury back out to deliberate on sentencing. They returned after about an hour with their recommendation. Assistant District Attorney Michael Smith addressed the court during the sentencing phase. He argued for life in prison without parole. This was an extremely difficult case, he later told reporters. In a case like this, there are no winners. But Smith emphasized that despite her age, despite her mental health struggles, Carly had proven herself dangerous. What's to say it won't happen again? He asked the jury. He argued that someone capable of such calculated violence at 14 should never be released back into society, never be allowed to walk through shopping malls or theaters or schools again. The defense begged for leniency. Attorney Kevin Kemp urged the jury to let the judge make the sentencing decision rather than recommending life without parole. He argued that Carly could rehabilitate, that she could come out of this at some point, and that locking her away forever would only compound the tragedy for everyone involved. The jury was unmoved. They recommended life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder and attempted murder charges, plus 10 years for tampering with evidence. Judge Dewey Arthur accepted this recommendation and imposed the sentence. Carly Madison Gregg, 15 years old, would spend the rest of her life behind bars. As of the fall of 2024, Carly is imprisoned in the Youthful Offender Unit of the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility in Rankin County. She's not eligible for parole, meaning unless her conviction is overturned on appeal, she will die in prison. Her defense team has filed motions for a new trial and to set aside the verdict. Attorney Bridget Todd revealed that new evidence had emerged. An unaired portion of an interview with Carly's biological father, Kevin Gregg, in which he mentioned that Carly had heard voices even as a young girl, before her more recent psychiatric treatment. Todd has been vocal about her belief that the justice system failed her client. In interviews after the sentencing, she said, Carly has no memory of March 19 after she took the dogs outside until she's on her hands and knees crawling through the drainage pipe. She maintains that Carly is not a danger to society, that severe mental illness drove her actions, and that trying a 14-year-old as an adult in such circumstances is fundamentally unjust. As Heath said, Todd told reporters, Ashley Smiley would be rolling over in her grave if she knew that Carly was convicted as an adult and is spending the rest of her life in jail. It's a statement that captures the impossible tragedy at the heart of this case. What would Ashley have wanted for her daughter? Would she have sought vengeance or mercy? Would she have believed in punishment or rehabilitation? We'll never know, because Ashley Smiley died on her daughter's bedroom floor, and she can't speak for herself anymore. The murder of Ashley Smiley defies easy answers. It's a story about mental illness, about adolescence, about the hidden struggles that can exist behind closed doors, even in the most ordinary seeming families. It's about the limitations of the help we offer to struggling teenagers, about the medications we prescribe without fully understanding their effects, about the ways young minds can fracture under pressures both internal and external. It's about the moment when intervention comes too late, when the warning signs we missed suddenly arrange themselves into a terrible pattern that can't be undone. Brandon, Mississippi had to reckon with the fact that one of their own, a beloved teacher, was killed by her own daughter in a house on a quiet street where nothing bad was supposed to happen. The community that came together for Friday night football games now came together to mourn, to process, to ask how this could have been prevented. There are no satisfying answers. Ashley Smiley's obituary described her as someone who loved being a mother more than anything. She had already lost one daughter, Natalie Gregg, before Carly was born. Now she's gone too. And Carly, the child Ashley devoted herself to, will spend her life in prison for taking her mother's life. Heath Smiley survived his wounds, but lost his wife and effectively lost his stepdaughter as well. He testified against her in court, fulfilling his duty to seek justice. But one wonders what that means for him now. Does he visit Carly in prison? Do they speak? Can there be any path toward reconciliation after something like this? The students Ashley taught will remember her warmth, her patience, her ability to make mathematics feel less daunting. They'll remember flowers left outside her classroom door, and the strange hollow feeling of a semester that continued without her. And somewhere in a correctional facility in Rankin County, a teenager who can't vote, can't drink, can't rent a car, serves a life sentence for murder. She'll grow older there. She'll turn 20, 30, 40. She'll outlive her mother's age. She'll become an adult in a place designed for people who society has decided can never be trusted to walk free again. Was this justice, or was this a failure of every system meant to protect children, help families, and prevent tragedies before they happen? Perhaps it was both. The house on Ashton Way still stands in Brandon, Mississippi. The security cameras that captured those terrible moments have been removed. The Smiley family photos, the video games Ashley and Carly played together, the paths where they walked Wyatt and Finn. All of it is gone now, scattered to wherever the remnants of tragedy go when a family ceases to exist. What remains is memory, and questions and a community still trying to understand. Ashley Smiley was born in Stuart, Florida on April 11, 1983. She loved the beach, loved Disney World, loved teaching mathematics to teenagers who needed someone patient enough to explain things one more time. She died on March 19, 2024, at the age of 40, in her daughter's bedroom, shot 3 times with her own gun. Her daughter, Carly Madison Gregg, was 15 years old when she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. There are no winners in this story. There is only loss in the slow, painful work of trying to find meaning in something that resists meaning at every turn. Sleep well tonight, and may the weight of such stories remind us to notice the struggles of those around us, to offer help before it's too late, to recognize that beneath the surface of ordinary lives, extraordinary pain can be hiding, waiting for the moment when everything breaks. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our 4th story. Story 4. On the night of May 8th, 2021, in the quiet suburb of Durbin Crossing, Florida, the air was warm and still. Families were settling in for the evening, preparing for Mother's Day celebrations the following morning. In one home, 13-year-old Tristan Bailey was in her room, unaware that the hours ahead would become a tragedy that would shake an entire community to its core. Tristan was the youngest of 5 children in the Bailey family. Born in Singapore in 2008, she had spent her first 4 years there before her family settled in St. Johns County, Florida. Those who knew her described an energetic girl with a powerful presence despite her young age. She was a 7th grader at Patriot Oaks Academy, where she stood out as a cheerleader and a loyal friend. Her mother would later say that Tristan was a powerful child that was able to give a lot to so many. The Bailey household was known as the Bailey Seven, a close-knit family preparing that weekend for a special Mother's Day breakfast. Tristan's sister Sophia had already planned to wake early and get things ready. As she always did, it was supposed to be an ordinary celebration filled with the small rituals that make families feel safe and connected. But sometime after midnight on May 9th, Tristan left her house. Whether she climbed out a window or slipped out a door, we may never know with certainty. What we do know is that she went to meet someone she knew. A 14-year-old classmate named Aiden Fucci, who also lived in the neighborhood. Aiden was a student at the same school, though he and Tristan didn't run in the same social circles. To many, he seemed like any other teenager navigating the challenges of middle school. But beneath the surface, something darker had been growing. His friends would later tell investigators that Aiden talked constantly about death and killing. He drew disturbing pictures of mutilated bodies. He spoke about wanting to slit someone's throat, saying it would be satisfying. One friend recalled that Aiden had been specific about his fantasies. He talked about walking at night, finding a random person, dragging them into the woods, and stabbing them. He told his girlfriend that it would happen soon, within the month. But teenagers say dark things sometimes, don't they? His friends didn't truly believe he would act on these thoughts. After all, you don't really take things like that seriously coming from someone your age. That Saturday night, Aiden had reached out to multiple girls, asking them to meet up with him. One girl's mother said no, and when the girl relayed this to Aiden, he became mean, calling her derogatory names. Years later, that girl would realize she had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. She would tell investigators, "That could be me. I could be dead right now." Tristan told one friend she was going to hang out with Aiden that Friday, but she didn't want the friend to come along. She said she had a bad feeling about it. That intuition, that small warning signal we sometimes feel, but ignore, turned out to be tragically accurate. At approximately 1:14 in the morning on May 9th, a surveillance camera at one of Durbin Crossing's community centers captured 2 figures walking together, heading north. The footage was grainy, but investigators would later confirm these were Tristan Bailey and Aiden Fucci. Half an hour later, at 1:45 a.m., a neighbor's security camera recorded the same pair walking along Saddlestone Drive, still together. What happened in the woods during those dark hours remains known only to one living person, but the evidence would later tell a story of unimaginable violence and a young girl fighting desperately for her life. At 3:27 in the morning, a surveillance camera captured a lone figure running back along the same street, this time heading in the opposite direction. The person was carrying shoes in their hands. It was Aiden Fucci alone. As dawn broke over Durban Crossing that Mother's Day morning, the Bailey family began stirring. Sophia came downstairs to prepare the special breakfast they had planned, but something was wrong. Tristan wasn't in her room. She wasn't anywhere in the house. At first, there might have been a moment of confusion. Perhaps she'd gone out early for a walk, but as the minutes passed, confusion turned to concern, and concern turned to alarm. At 10 o'clock that morning, Forrest and Stacy Bailey called the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office to report their daughter missing. They told deputies they had last seen Tristan around midnight. Within an hour, the Sheriff's Office posted a message on Facebook, asking the community to help find the missing teenager. A Florida missing child alert was issued. The neighborhood mobilized. Residents joined search parties, walking through the subdivision, calling Tristan's name, checking yards and wooded areas. The hours dragged on. With each passing minute, hope began to feel heavier, more difficult to hold on to. Around 6 o'clock that evening, a man named Hart was out for his usual walk near the retention pond at the end of Saddlestone Drive. He had heard about the missing girl. The whole neighborhood had been buzzing with concern all day. As he walked along the pond's edge, looking into the woods, something caught his eye. There, in the wooded area just beyond the water, he saw what he had desperately hoped he wouldn't find. A body. A young girl. Hart immediately called 911, his voice shaking as he tried to explain the exact location to the dispatcher. By 8 o'clock that evening, the worst had been confirmed. The body was Tristan Bailey. She had been stabbed. But it wasn't until later that the full horror of what had happened would become clear. The medical examiner's report would reveal that Tristan had suffered 114 stab wounds. 114 separate times a knife had pierced her body. 49 of those wounds were defensive on her hands, her arms, her head. These marks told the story of a girl who had fought with everything she had. She had fought to live. She had raised her hands to protect herself. She had struggled against her attacker even as the blade kept coming. Again and again. The knife itself had broken during the attack. The tip had snapped off and become embedded in Tristan's skull. Investigators would later find the buck knife in the pond near her body, its tip missing. That tiny fragment of metal lodged in her head would become a crucial piece of evidence. There was another disturbing detail. Written on the inside of Tristan's left ankle was the word karma. On her right ankle, someone had drawn a smiley face. Investigators never determined who had made these marks, but one classmate would later tell police that Tristan herself had written karma on her ankle in black marker. The smiley face remained a mystery, a bizarre, unsettling detail in an already horrific crime. As darkness fell on that Mother's Day, investigators were already piecing together what had happened. The surveillance footage was critical. It showed Tristan walking with someone, then that same person running back alone carrying shoes. The timeline was clear. Now they needed to identify who that person was. Aiden Fucci became a focus almost immediately. Other teenagers had seen him and Tristan together that night. It had been at a friend's house in the neighborhood before walking off together after 1 in the morning. When investigators spoke with Aiden that Sunday evening, his story kept changing. He gave conflicting accounts of where he'd been and what he'd done. Around 9 o'clock that night, Aiden and his parents sat in an interview room at the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. When his parents told him that Tristan was dead and that he had been the last person seen with her, Aiden's response was chilling. "How is that my problem?" he asked. He would soon find out exactly how it was his problem. Just before midnight on May 10th, about 24 hours after Tristan had been killed, investigators executed a search warrant at the Fucci residence. In Aiden's bedroom, they found a sheath that matched the knife discovered near Tristan's body. They found clothing with blood on it. In the bathroom sink, there were more bloodstains. Forensic testing would later confirm that Tristan's DNA was on the knife, on Aiden's shoes, and on a t-shirt found in his bedroom. Aiden's DNA was found on Tristan's body. The physical evidence was overwhelming. At 3:30 in the morning, Aiden Fucci was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. He was 14 years old. But the investigation was far from over. Detectives uncovered more disturbing details. At some point during that chaotic day, while sitting in the back of a police patrol car, Aiden had taken a selfie and posted it to Snapchat with the caption, "Hey guys, has anybody seen Tristan lately?" The spelling was careless. The tone was mocking. It suggested someone who felt no remorse, who perhaps even found the situation amusing. Surveillance footage from inside the Fucci home revealed something equally troubling. Between 12:55 and 1:28 p.m. on May 9th, while the community was still searching for Tristan, before her body had been found, Aiden's mother, Crystal Smith, was captured on camera washing a pair of her son's jeans in the bathroom sink. Forensic testing of the drain would reveal traces of Tristan's blood. Crystal Smith was arrested on June 10, 2021, and charged with tampering with evidence. According to investigators, when she had been in the interrogation room with her son, she had advised him to find his story and stick with it. She had tried to convince him that he'd been wearing khakis the night of the murder, not the blood-stained blue jeans that would become evidence. On May 27, 2021, just over 2 weeks after Tristan's murder, a grand jury indicted Aiden Fucci on a charge of first-degree murder. The decision was made to try him as an adult, despite his age. State Attorney R.J. Lariza held a press conference to explain the decision. He talked about the sheer number of stab wounds, which demonstrated prolonged, deliberate violence. He mentioned that Aiden had told multiple witnesses he wanted to kill someone by taking them into the woods and stabbing them, exactly what had happened to Tristan. To say that it was horrific could arguably be made as an understatement, Lariza said. He also directed a message to parents. "I hope that parents will learn something from this vicious and brutal murder, and that is you need to know what your kids are doing and what they're saying." The community of St. Johns County was shattered. This wasn't a stranger who had come into their neighborhood. This wasn't some distant threat. This was one of their own children, someone who had walked the same halls, attended the same school, lived on the same streets. Parents struggled with how to explain such a thing to their younger children. How do you help a child understand that someone their age, someone they might have known, could do something so terrible? One resident called it a wake-up call, saying, "I can't believe it happened here, but at the same time, of course it happened here. It can happen anywhere." That realization that evil doesn't announce itself, that it can exist in places that feel safe, was perhaps the hardest truth to accept. For Aiden Fucci, the months after his arrest were marked by continued troubling behavior. Housed at the Duval County Jail while awaiting trial, he was involved in multiple physical altercations. He extorted other teenage inmates for their commissary items, threatening to stab them if they didn't comply. He threatened to kill corrections officers and their families. On one occasion, he had to be pepper sprayed to be restrained. Another inmate reported that Aiden had bragged he would stab a bitch face to face rather than just shoot someone like others there had done. These incidents painted a picture of someone who had not been changed by his circumstances, who showed no remorse, who remained violent and threatening even after being locked up. The case slowly moved toward trial. Aiden pleaded not guilty initially, which meant that Tristan's family would have to endure the trauma of a full trial, listening to every detail of how their daughter had died, seeing the evidence, reliving that terrible night over and over. But on February 6, 2023, the very day jury selection was scheduled to begin, something unexpected happened. Just before the proceedings were to start, Aiden Fucci changed his plea. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. There had been no plea deal with prosecutors. He simply admitted what he had done. The Bailey family, who called themselves the Bailey Seven, released a statement expressing relief. They said the change of plea brought them significant relief, and that they would not have agreed to any plea deal. Just as Tristan fought for her life, they wrote, "We equally fought for her." During the brief hearing, Aiden was allowed to make a statement. He apologized to Tristan's family and to his own family. He wrote a letter as well, expressing regret for the pain he had caused. But words on paper, spoken in a courtroom under the weight of overwhelming evidence, could not undo what had been done. They could not bring Tristan back. The sentencing phase was scheduled for March 2023. Because Aiden had been a juvenile at the time of the murder, he was not eligible for the death penalty. He faced a minimum sentence of 40 years in prison, and a maximum of life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. The sentencing hearings took place over 2 days, beginning on March 21, 2023. They were emotionally devastating. 7 members of Tristan's family gave victim impact statements. Friends testified. Members of her cheerleading team spoke about the girl they had lost. Employees from Patriot Oaks Academy shared their memories and their grief. Tristan's mother, Stacy, spoke directly to the judge. "Please do not for 1 second think Fucci could be rehabilitated at any point," she said. "He is beyond saving." Then she turned to face Aiden Fucci directly. "Aiden Fucci, you have destroyed me. You have destroyed my family." One of Tristan's sisters, Alexis, created a powerful visual representation of her sister's suffering. She dropped 1,114 aqua-colored stone hearts into a glass jar, one by one, each representing a stab wound Tristan had endured. The sound of each stone hitting the glass echoed through the courtroom. The jar remained there while each family member read their statements. When they finished, each added a white stone to represent something related to Tristan's death. The symbolism was profound, the pain counted out in stones, made tangible, made impossible to ignore. Alexis and another sister, Brittany Bailey Russell, testified that they both suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder since the murder. Brittany had been on her honeymoon when she learned her youngest sister was missing. "Agony isn't painful enough," she said, trying to find words for the impossible. Aiden's defense team tried to present mitigating factors. They brought forward evidence of his ADHD diagnosis, the emotional neglect he had suffered as a child, a history of mental illness in his family, and the fact that he had lived with a physically abusive stepfather. His attorney, Rosemary Peoples, recommended a sentence of 40 years, suggesting that Aiden deserved a chance at eventual rehabilitation. Aiden's grandmother also testified, pleading with the judge. "Please don't take him out of our lives forever," she said. "I know there is some good in Aiden." But the prosecution painted a different picture. Clinical psychologist Dr. Greg Pritchard testified that Aiden's behavior after the murder had been callous, and that he had shown no evidence he could be rehabilitated. Pritchard described Aiden's unusual fascination with gore and violence that had existed long before the murder. He shared chilling details from an interview with Aiden's former girlfriend, who had told investigators about the specific, detailed way Aiden had described wanting to kill someone. State Attorney Jennifer Dunton argued that the crime was extremely unique and extremely violent. She pointed to the level of premeditation. Aiden had talked about wanting to kill someone, had described the method, had even given a time frame of within the month. She noted his disciplinary problems at school, his threats to other inmates and corrections officers, his complete lack of remorse. She recommended the maximum sentence, life in prison. On March 24, 2023, Judge Lee Smith delivered his sentence. He called the case the most difficult and shocking he had ever presided over. He spoke at length about the nature of the crime, trying to understand what could drive a 14-year-old to do something so brutal. "This was not done out of greed," Judge Smith said. "It was not done in retaliation, retribution, or revenge. It was not a crime of passion. It was not a crime that was committed because he felt rejected by her. It was not done in a fit of uncontrollable anger. There was no reason. There was no purpose. It was done for no other reason than to satisfy this defendant's internal desire to feel what it was like to kill someone." The judge sentenced Aiden Fucci to life in prison because he had been a juvenile at the time of the crime. The sentence would be subject to review after 25 years. But for now, for the foreseeable future, Aiden Fucci would spend his life behind bars. He was 16 years old at sentencing. He is currently incarcerated at Cross City Correctional Institution in Florida. The Bailey family established the Tristan Bailey Memorial Foundation in their daughter's honor. Their advocacy led to the passage of a law in Florida that restricts the disclosure of crime scene photographs of any minor who has been murdered in the state. It was a way to protect other families from the additional trauma of having their children's worst moments made public, spread across the internet, turned into spectacle. The case left many questions that have no satisfying answers. Why did Aiden Fucci do this? What drove a 14-year-old to stab a classmate 14 times? Was it the violent fantasies he'd been nurturing? Was it the troubled home life? The emotional neglect, the abusive stepfather? Was there something fundamentally broken in him that no amount of understanding could explain? Judge Smith seemed to conclude that there was no rational explanation, no understandable motive. Sometimes, he suggested, evil simply exists. Sometimes people commit acts of violence, not because of any clear reason, but because of some internal darkness that defies comprehension. The community of St. Johns County continues to remember Tristan Bailey. They remember her energy, her loyalty to her friends, her presence on the cheerleading squad. They remember the girl she was, not just the victim she became. They hold vigils on the anniversary of her death. They wear aqua, her favorite color, in her honor. But they also remember the lesson that her death taught them, that safety is fragile, that evil can live next door, that parents must pay attention to warning signs in their children's behavior. Aiden's friends had heard him talk about killing. They'd seen his disturbing drawing, but no one truly believed he would act on these fantasies. Perhaps that's the hardest lesson of all, that we must take seriously the dark things that young people sometimes say, even when we desperately want to believe they don't mean them. On the night of May 8th, 2021, Tristan Bailey was a 13-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her. She had no way of knowing that the person she agreed to meet, someone she knew from school, someone who lived in her neighborhood, would become the person who ended her life. She fought back. The defensive wounds proved that she tried to survive. But against 14 stab wounds, against such relentless violence, she had no chance. Mother's Day 2021 became a day of unspeakable grief for the Bailey family. Instead of celebration, every Mother's Day since carries that weight. Every holiday, every milestone that Tristan should have reached. Her high school graduation, her first job, perhaps someday, a family of her own, exists now only as an absence, a reminder of what was stolen. Aiden Fucci's mother, Crystal Smith, eventually faced her own legal consequences for tampering with evidence. Her case was separate from her son's, a reminder that the ripples of violence spread wider than just the immediate victim and perpetrator. Families on both sides are forever changed. The story of Tristan Bailey's murder is not unique in its basic elements. Every year, young people are killed by violence. Every year, families are shattered by loss. But each case carries its own specific horror, its own particular details that make it impossible to forget. The 14 stab wounds, the defensive wounds showing how she fought, the word karma and the smiley face on her ankles, the surveillance footage showing two young people walking together into darkness, only one emerging, the sounds of aqua stones dropping into a glass jar in a silent courtroom. These are the details that ensure Tristan Bailey will not be forgotten. These are the reasons her case drew national attention. Why documentaries have been made about her death. Why people who never knew her feel compelled to remember her name. In the end, what can we take from this tragedy? Perhaps only this, that we must cherish the people we love while we have them. That we must pay attention to warning signs, even when they seem impossible to believe. That we must create systems and communities where troubled young people can get help before they hurt others. That we must remember victims as full people, not just as the violence that ended their lives. Tristan Bailey was a cheerleader, a daughter, a sister, a friend. She loved to color aqua. She stood up for her friends. She was described as powerful despite her young age, someone who could give a lot to so many. She was 13 years old when she died, fighting for her life until the very end. And Aiden Fucci, despite the explanations and mitigating factors presented at his sentencing, despite the trauma in his own background, made a choice. He planned, he invited, he acted. He stabbed a classmate 14 times and ran home carrying his shoes. He posted a mocking message on social media. He showed no remorse, even in custody, even facing the rest of his life in prison. 2 young lives forever intertwined by one night of unimaginable violence. One life ended, another in many ways ended as well, just in a different way. And 2 families, 2 communities, left to try to make sense of something that ultimately defies sense. The Durban Crossing neighborhood is quiet again now. People have moved on with their daily lives, as people must. But there's a shadow that remains, a knowledge that cannot be unknown. Something terrible happened there. A girl fought for her life in the woods, near a retention pond. She lost that fight. And everyone who lived through those days, who searched for her, who hoped she'd be found safe, carries that with them still. Rest easy, Tristan Bailey. May your memory be a blessing to those who loved you. And may your story serve as a reminder of the preciousness and fragility of life. If you or someone you know is struggling with violent thoughts, please reach out for help. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24/7 at 988. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. In the small town of Berthoud, Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains stand watch over sprawling fields and quiet neighborhoods, there lived a young woman whose life revolved around horses, open skies, and dreams of the future. Her name was Ashley Doolittle, and by all accounts she was the kind of person who made others feel seen and valued. Ashley was born on May 20th, 1998, in Louisville, Colorado. From her earliest years she had a way about her, warm, genuine, with a smile that seemed to brighten any room she entered. Those who knew her often remarked on this quality. She wasn't the type to pretend or put on airs. She was simply herself, comfortable in her own skin, which is a rare thing for anyone, let alone a teenager. When Ashley was 5 years old, she climbed onto a horse for the first time. From that moment, something clicked. Horses became more than just animals to her. They became her passion, her purpose, and as she would often say, her life. She learned to ride with dedication and care, spending countless hours in the saddle, understanding the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the trust between rider and animal. As she grew older, Ashley joined Boulder County 4-H, where she spent 8 years immersing herself in everything equestrian. She competed in horse judging competitions, participated in horse bowl and hippology teams, and showed horses at events throughout the region. Her skill and dedication didn't go unnoticed. In 2014, she was named the champion high individual overall at the National 4-H Western Roundup, a remarkable achievement that spoke to her talent and work ethic. But Ashley wasn't solely focused on horses. She had a broader vision for her life. She helped found the Thompson FFA chapter at her school and served as an officer for 2 years, channeling her love for agriculture into leadership and community involvement. She participated on national horse judging teams, winning multiple championships. She competed on the Arabian Nationals champion team for 3 consecutive years. These weren't just hobbies, they were the building blocks of the future she was creating for herself. In May 2016, Ashley graduated from Berthoud High School. She was 18 years old, standing at the threshold of adulthood with plans that excited her. She had been accepted into Colorado State University's agricultural business program, and she intended to start classes that fall. She wanted to turn her passion for agriculture and horses into a career, to educate others about Western heritage and the agricultural lifestyle that meant so much to her. That same spring, Ashley received another honor. She was named the 2016 Boulder County Fair and Rodeo Lady-in-Waiting. This title was significant. It meant that she would represent the fair and rodeo at public events, and the following year she was expected to be crowned queen. For Ashley, this role was about more than pageantry. She saw it as an opportunity to share her love for rodeo with young people, especially girls who might be interested in the royalty program. She had even proposed starting a princess program for younger girls, wanting to inspire the next generation. Those who knew Ashley described her in similar ways. She was happy, funny, kind, and humble. She had a big heart and was always willing to help others. Her 4-H leader, Kim Madsen, remembered that Ashley never worried about impressing anyone. She was goofy, authentic, and completely comfortable being herself. Teenage girls often feel pressure to act a certain way, but Ashley seemed free from that burden. She was just her wonderful self. Ashley's relationship with her family was close and loving. Her mother, Anne-Marie Doolittle, treasured their time together. They would talk about horses, about Ashley's plans, about life. On the morning of June 9th, 2016, before Ashley left the house, she told her mother, "I love you." It was something many of us say without thinking, a routine goodbye. Neither of them could have known it would be the last conversation they would ever have. During her senior year of high school, Ashley had been in a relationship with a young man named Tanner Flores. He was also 18, also from Berthold. Like many teenage relationships, theirs had its ups and downs. But as time went on, those around them began to notice concerning patterns. Friends would later recall that Ashley and Tanner had been fighting frequently in the weeks before June 9th. The relationship had become strained, unhealthy. Ashley made the difficult decision to end things. She broke up with Tanner, choosing to distance herself from a relationship that no longer felt right. For Ashley, this was about moving forward, about prioritizing her own well-being and her future. She wanted to remain friends if possible, but she was clear that their romantic relationship was over. Tanner, however, struggled to accept this reality. In the days following the breakup, he sent Ashley numerous text messages. Digital forensic specialists would later examine these exchanges. The messages revealed a young man who was hurt, angry, and unable to let go. He accused Ashley of cheating on him, though she had not. He expressed regret about money he'd spent on her. He told her he was going to do something stupid. Ashley responded calmly, denying his accusations and explaining that their relationship had been over for some time. She had wanted to be friends, she told him, but his behavior was making that impossible. On the evening of June 9th, Tanner asked Ashley to meet him. He wanted to talk, he said, to discuss things. Ashley, perhaps hoping for closure or simply trying to be kind, agreed. They arranged to meet at the Lonhagler Reservoir near Carter Lake, about 50 miles north of Denver. It was a quiet, isolated spot, the kind of place where two people could have a private conversation. Ashley told her mother she would be home by 7:30 that evening. But as the hours passed and darkness fell, Ashley didn't return. Anne-Marie Doolittle waited, growing increasingly worried. Finally, she decided to drive to the reservoir to look for her daughter. When she arrived, she found Ashley's car parked in the lot, empty and silent. Ashley was nowhere to be found. What happened at that reservoir would only become clear in the days and weeks that followed, pieced together from evidence, confessions, and testimony. Ashley and Tanner had met as planned. They sat in Tanner's pickup truck, parked near the water. The conversation Tanner hoped for didn't go the way he wanted. According to his own later account, Ashley glared at him and turned away. In that moment, something inside him broke, or perhaps something that had been building finally erupted. Tanner reached into the back seat of his truck and grabbed a .22 caliber revolver. He pulled back the hammer, a deliberate action required to ready the weapon. Then he raised the gun and shot Ashley in the back of the head. The first shot did not kill her instantly. Ashley began to move, to twitch. She was still alive, still fighting. Medical examiners would later testify that she might have survived this first gunshot if Tanner had called for help, if he had sought medical attention. But he didn't. Instead, Tanner pulled back the hammer again. He shot her a second time. And then as she continued to struggle for life, he shot her a third time. 3 times he made the choice to pull that hammer back. 3 times he chose to fire. 3 deliberate actions that ended Ashley's life. When Ashley finally stopped moving, Tanner wrapped her body in a blanket. Then he began to drive. He drove west, away from the Front Range, across Colorado. He drove for hours, covering more than 300 miles, until he reached his late grandfather's ranch in Colburn in Mesa County on the western slope. During this journey, Ashley's body lay in the cab of his truck, wrapped in that blanket. Tanner would later claim that he cleaned her up at the ranch before returning her to the truck. The meaning of this statement remains chilling and unclear. Meanwhile, Ashley's family was frantic. Her mother had found her car, but not her daughter. The Larimer County Sheriff's Office issued a be-on-the-lookout alert for Ashley and Tanner. Deputies began searching for the young woman, fearing the worst but hoping for the best. On June 10th, 2016, deputies in Mesa County located Tanner at his grandfather's ranch. When they approached his truck, they made a devastating discovery. Ashley's body was there in the cab, still wrapped in the blanket. Tanner was taken into custody. In the hours that followed, investigators interviewed him, recording the conversation on video. At first, Tanner told a story designed to absolve himself. He claimed that Ashley had grabbed the gun and pointed it at herself, that it had gone off accidentally while he tried to wrestle it away from her, that he had only shot her the second time to end her suffering. But investigators challenged this account. It didn't make sense. Someone familiar with guns wouldn't handle a weapon that way. The physical evidence didn't support his story. Within minutes, Tanner's story began to change. Eventually, he admitted what had actually happened. He described how the conversation hadn't gone as he'd planned, how Ashley had turned away from him, how he'd grabbed the gun and shot her. She started twitching and freaking out, so I shot her again, he said. I thought it would be an instant thing. This phrase, "I thought it would be an instant thing," reveals the terrible naivety and selfishness of the act. He had expected killing someone to be quick and clean, like in movies. He hadn't anticipated the brutal reality that Ashley would suffer, would fight for life, would force him to confront the horror of what he was doing. The news of Ashley's death sent shockwaves through Berthold and the wider Colorado community. 700 people attended her funeral at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Parish in Loveland. The service was standing room only. Friends, family, 4-H members, FFA participants, and members of the rodeo community came together to mourn a life cut impossibly short. Ashley's casket was carried by her brothers, Michael Doolittle and Brandon Kritakaville. People wore pins showing Ashley in her rodeo outfit, her smile bright and full of promise. The priest, Reverend Steve Adams, spoke about the difficulty of processing such a senseless, violent death. He acknowledged the questions that many were asking. Where was God when this happened? How do we make sense of this? The following July, Ashley was posthumously crowned as the 2017 Boulder County Fair and Rodeo Queen. It was a bittersweet honor, recognition of what she would have been, what she should have become. In the months after Ashley's death, her mother Anne Marie channeled her grief into action. In March 2017, she founded the Ashley Doolittle Foundation. The mission was twofold: to preserve Ashley's legacy and to raise awareness about teen dating violence. The statistics Anne Marie uncovered were staggering. 1 in 3 U.S. teens between ages 14 and 20 have been victims of dating violence. Young women in Ashley's age group face 3 times greater risk than any other demographic. Annually, 1.5 million high school students nationwide experience physical abuse from a dating partner. Each year, approximately 1,200 deaths occur due to relationship violence, more than 3 per day. The foundation works to educate young people about the warning signs of unhealthy relationships: extreme jealousy, controlling behavior, constant monitoring of phones or email, isolation from friends and family, mood swings, explosive temper, and possessiveness. These are red flags that too often go unrecognized or ignored. The community rallied around the Doolittle family and the foundation. Horse trainer Brian Sprague, who had never met Ashley, organized a memorial horse show that eventually grew into a 2-day rodeo event. The ranching community contributed time, money, and resources to keep Ashley's memory alive and to support the foundation's mission. As for Tanner Flores, he was charged with first-degree murder, felony murder, and second-degree kidnapping. His defense attorney entered a not guilty plea and requested a mental health evaluation. When the case went to trial in October 2017, the defense didn't deny that Tanner had killed Ashley. Instead, they argued against premeditation, claiming this was a heat-of-the-moment decision, that Tanner was 18, confused and hurting, that he acted irrationally, impulsively, and hastily. The prosecution presented a different picture. They argued that Tanner was a jealous and controlling boyfriend who couldn't accept that Ashley might eventually date someone else. They pointed to the text messages sent in the days before Ashley's death, messages filled with accusations, regret, and barely veiled threats. They emphasized that Tanner had made 3 separate, deliberate choices to pull back the hammer and fire. They noted that Ashley could have survived if he had sought help after the first shot, but instead he had ensured her death and then driven her body across the state. During the trial, Tanner took the stand. He testified that he hadn't planned to kill Ashley, that it wasn't intentional, that it was just something that happened. But his own videotaped confession contradicted this claim. In that confession, he had described making the decision, grabbing the gun, pulling the trigger 3 times. After a 7-day trial, the jury deliberated. They found Tanner Flores guilty of first-degree murder, felony murder, and second-degree kidnapping. On October 5, 2017, Judge Gregory Lamons sentenced Tanner to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 32 years for kidnapping. When given the opportunity to speak at his sentencing, Tanner declined to comment. Anne Marie Doolittle read a statement to the court. She spoke about the memories that Tanner had stolen from her family, the silly arguments she would never have with her daughter, the wedding where she would never walk Ashley down the aisle, the grandchildren she would never meet, the horse ranch they would never enjoy together. But she also expressed compassion for the Flores family. "Our hearts go out to the Flores family," she said. "Part of me feels bad for him, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't be punished for his actions." The Doolittle family had decided they didn't want to seek the death penalty. They didn't want to take from Tanner what he had taken from Ashley. They wanted justice, but not vengeance. Outside the courthouse, Jeff Doolittle, Ashley's father, expressed mixed feelings about the outcome. "I think there is some relief that we have come to an end," he said. "But I don't know if justice will ever truly be served." The family acknowledged that there were no winners in this tragedy. 2 families had been destroyed. The Doolittles had lost their daughter, and the Flores family had lost their son. Not to death, but to the terrible choices he had made. Today, the Ashley Doolittle Foundation continues its work. It has reached thousands of students through school presentations about dating violence awareness and prevention. The annual Memorial Rodeo and Horse Show brings together the equestrian community to celebrate Ashley's legacy while raising funds for the foundation's programs. Young riders who participate in these events often speak about Ashley's influence. Many never met her, but they've heard the stories about her kindness, her authenticity, her dedication to horses, her vision for the Princess program that would inspire young girls. They see in her not just a victim, but a person who lived fully in the time she had, who made a difference in her community, who believed in helping others. Ashley's story serves as a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly life can change, how dangerous certain relationships can become, and how important it is to recognize warning signs before it's too late. It's a reminder that young women in particular face elevated risks in dating relationships, that jealousy and control are not signs of love, but of danger. If Ashley could speak to us now, those who knew her believe she would want her story to help others. She would want young people to understand that leaving an unhealthy relationship isn't selfish, it's necessary. She would want parents to talk openly with their children about what healthy relationships look like. She would want friends to speak up if they see concerning behavior. The night sky over Berthoud looks much the same as it did on June 9th, 2016. The Lonhagler Reservoir remains a quiet spot where people come to fish and enjoy nature. The Boulder County Fair and Rodeo continues each year, with young women wearing crowns and representing their community. But Ashley's absence is felt in the empty seat at the dinner table, in the horses she once rode, now cared for by others, in the conversations that will never happen, the future that will never unfold, in the hearts of a family learning to carry on while holding on to memories of a daughter, sister, and friend whose life ended far too soon. Ashley Marie Doolittle was 18 years old when she died. She had graduated from high school 3 weeks earlier. She had dreams of college, of a career in agricultural business, of continuing to work with horses, of making a difference in her community. She had a bright smile, a kind heart, and a future full of possibility. That future was stolen in a moment of anger by someone who claimed to love her but couldn't let her go. The lesson in Ashley's story isn't just about her death. It's about her life, how she lived authentically, how she pursued her passions, how she helped others. It's about the importance of recognizing that love should never come with fear, control, or violence. It's about understanding that breaking up with someone is not a betrayal, but sometimes an act of self-preservation. And it's about remembering that behind every true crime story, there is a real person with hopes and dreams, with family and friends, with a life that mattered far beyond the circumstances of their death. Ashley Doolittle's legacy lives on, not just in the foundation that bears her name, but in every young person who learns about healthy relationships because of her story, in every life potentially saved by increased awareness of dating violence, and in the memory of a young woman who loved horses, believed in the good in people, and deserved so much more than the hand she was dealt. Rest gently, Ashley. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.